Welcome back onto yet another edition of Down. My name is Brad Nadalt. We've got the coach Coach Parry with us once again, and today we're talking about hills, hills, and more hills, because that's what's coming on the 8th of June. We're going to be digging into how to prepare yourself properly for the hills that are coming your way at Comrades. We're also going to talk a little bit about making sure you bounce back from your runs properly and incorporating recovery weeks in your training too. Coach, nice to see you once again and hear you. All well on your side of the world?
Yeah, very, very good. And we are getting into the chunky stuff now. So, everyone is kind of on a little bit of a different rhythm because it depends exactly when you qualified and took your recovery. But typically, or if you are following our plans, you're probably about to have your first recovery week. So yeah, between hills and a bit of respite coming up, plenty to talk about this time out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned beginning of March, I was feeling great, but I can definitely feel that we're on the up, and I think a lot of people are as well. So that's why these recovery talks are so important. But we'll get to that a little bit later on in this episode. The thing that I wanted to chat to you about, Lindsay, was making sure that we are prepared both mentally and physically for the hills that are coming our way at Comrades 2025. And in particular, just making sure that we are okay to run them. Because for some people that don't live in areas that are hilly or train in areas that are hilly at all, then I think specifically about all the folks from the Netherlands that come out and run Comrades every year. Because we always get this question, and I always have a quiet chuckle to myself that they literally have no hills. I mean, you can practically stand on one side of the Netherlands, and if you stand on your toes, you can see the other side of the country. But they have a couple of railway bridges that they run up and over. What do you do if you do live in an area where there aren't many hills? How do you get yourself prepared for a race like Comrades if that is the case?
Yeah, cool question. And there's probably two, I mean, there are two, not parts to that specific question, but two parts to the hills question. It's like, what do you do if you live in a hilly area, and what do you do in an area with no hills? So if you live somewhere where there are no hills, obviously strength training is a big um, advantage or shortcuts around getting strong and preparing for hills, both the up and the down. And I think that's also important is that uh, most people fear the ups, but we do get a lot of questions too from people about the downs. So it's not just about prepping for the ups and the downs. But if you live in the Netherlands, flat, what are you going to do? You got a couple of options. Strength training, obviously, is one of them. We really banged on about that 1 or 2 weeks ago. So I'm not gonna harp on too much about strength training again, but it certainly make a big difference for getting you strong enough for both the ups and the downs. You can then also use a treadmill very effectively. And if you've got a treadmill in particular that can do both incline and decline, that's perfect because then you can pop on a hilly route and you can literally do a few hilly route runs on the treadmill. But certainly you can do very effective hill work on the treadmill. And you can do that whether you are on a one with an incline, I mean, with a decline function or not. You do your incline work between 3 and 5%, and then you put it on 0% and either very, very easy jog or a walk just to recover properly and then go again. So treadmill, extremely effective. Um, if you don't have access to a treadmill or you find running on a treadmill just too unbelievably boring, although the intervals already do make it much easier because you're focusing on such a short-term little requirements. Um, and then you can head out to a stadium if you've got an athletics track or a stadium in your area that you can get to, and you can literally just run all the way up the stairs, across, down the stairs, across, up the stairs, and you have a look on the plans and go, right, I'm supposed to be doing a 45-minute hill session or an hour hill session, and then you can up and across and do all of those things, and really have a good session to build strength that way. And then if you like, Europe's small, so what I would do though is just to plan a couple of outings where you either go to the border regions or wherever you can, where you can just get in some hill running so that you can practice a little bit of hill running. Yeah, you look like you have a question for me before I dive into the kind of, okay, but what happens if I live in such a hilly area that I can't get away from hills?
Yeah, I was going to say it's not just the Netherlands, Lindsay. I mean, we both grew up in a little town in the middle of the Free State that was fairly flat as well. So there's lots of places that if you can get out and get away for the odd sort of longer run where there are hills, it'll definitely help as well. I wanted to ask about cycling before we get into the sort of what if you live in a super hilly area. Would cycling help? And the reason I'm asking this is because I ride quite a bit, and I do find that it definitely does help my running, but I don't know if it has such a big effect on being able to run up hills better.
No, so absolutely. When I cycled a lot, then that is one of the things that I did find is that cycling did help my uphill running legs. And conversely, also my running made me a particularly good cyclist on the hills. Now, the one question that I can't answer there is that I didn't ride a lot in flat areas. So I don't know if part of the reason why cycling carryover to my uphill running came in part from cycling very much. When I was a cyclist, I was very much in the same kind of area as you, Brad. So yeah, very possible that the actual cycling and cycling of hills has more to do with it. But similarly, if you live in an area that's not hilly at all, then doing some harder bike workouts may well be a good way to stimulate the hills.
Yeah, I mean, you could go into a spinning class and like literally turn yourself inside out, and that's one way to do it. Okay, let's talk about if you live in a super hilly area. Is there is there a chance of running too many hills?
Absolutely, because if you're running hills constantly, you can get hamstring and glute tendinopathy. So that's absolutely a risk that you have to be a little bit aware of when you live in a super hilly area. Typically, if we build up well. So, in other words, you've built up very slowly over a long period of time and you've run those hills appropriately. So, you don't run the hill hard every time you get to a run or defend your pace. Like if you are running easy up those hills and taking the walk breaks as required, that's much better. But I think the more important thing here is that if you are doing the hill work, if you're doing long runs with hills, if you've got hills in almost every single run you do in the week, then I don't think more formal hills and hill work is a good idea. I think that's where you start to risk getting potential hamstring and glute tendinopathies. And so your time will be better spent actually turning those hills just into standard intervals on flatter ground.
Okay, let me ask this question. It's not necessarily hill related, although it is probably hill related. I just got thinking about the camber on some of the parts of the Comrades races or route. Is there any way to prepare for that? I mean, I think particularly down Fields Hill, it's quite bad. But is there anything we can do to alleviate the damage that the camber is going to do to you on Comrades race day?
So proprioceptive work or balancing work, I mean that is really it, and even that has very limited carryover into fixing for that extreme camber. I think it's a really good question, Brad, because a lot of people come after the fact that Comrades and talk to us about the fact that Comrades is the only race that they ever run of any distance where they cramp. And I do think that's got a lot to do with the camber of the road is quite different at Comrades. And so I would say doing some proprioceptive work and having really nice, strong ankles. So doing a bit of balance work on a Bosu ball, doing some single leg work like single leg squats or step ups onto a bench where you have this foot planted and really working on the stability, quite possibly doing like ankle inversion and ankle eversion with a band strapped around your foot so that you can just really work those muscles outside the foot and then inside the foot. Those might be some things that would help just have you much stronger and better prepared for the camber. But outside of running those kind of cambers and getting used to it, probably not. And I think that's probably the area where the Durban locals have the biggest advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also just think here in Cape Town, we've got a couple, I think, specifically of Rose Drive. If you've ever run two oceans that stretch from the top of Constantia Neck as you head down towards Kirstenbosch, is the camber there can get quite hectic too. So, yeah, I think the only way you can actually prepare is actually to run and fairly often. But again, you then are risking sort of ITB sort of injuries and like weird sort of alignment sort of things. So super interesting. Lindsay, before we get into the recovery, we got one of the funniest comments on our YouTube channel on this podcast about a week and a half ago, and I have to share a bit of it because I think you're going to find it pretty funny too. So it came from RTV82. So I don't know who it is and what the name is, but gave some feedback about the race, saying very unique podcast in the sense that they can't listen to it at double speed because you speak too slow and I speak too fast. So there's like we're messing up there when it comes to listening to this podcast at faster speed. And then they went on to say, P.S. I'm more and more in love with this race because of the information that I've been listening to is unbelievable. He says, first it was about CBD and magic mushrooms, and now we're telling people to walk during a race. Obviously, listen to our run walk episode. So there's going to be a lot more of these sorts of comradesisms that you won't hear about in any other races. So please do make sure you subscribe to the channel. But I love that comment. So thank you very much for sharing it. Either you need to speed up the way you speak or I need to slow down. One of the two, Linz. We need to decide.
I think it's probably easier for me to try and speed up. I'll try not to think while I speak.
Maybe I should slow down. I think that might be the safer option. All right, cool. Let's talk some recovery now, Lindsay. And there's two parts to this that I wanted to touch on. You mentioned at the start of this podcast that if the folks who are on the Coach Parry training plans, they should have a recovery week coming up imminently. But I wanted to touch, before we touch on that recovery week and the importance of those recovery weeks, I wanted to talk about making sure you bounce back from your sessions in a normal week. So obviously, as we're building mileage, doing a lot of the things right can make a big difference to how we feel in our next run and the run after that and the run after that. So won't you dig into the importance of post-run recovery and what we can do to make sure that we bounce back quickly?
Yeah, for sure. So there's always two parts to recovery, Brad, and that's rest and nutrition. And so I think it's very important that in almost every single week that we put in some place for some rest so that we can really get some good recovery. I like a Friday. Spoke to someone earlier today. They like a Sunday. So whatever day that is, just give yourself that day. So that's super important. And then the nutrition in particular, where you are going, is like immediately after. And we've got like what we call the golden window. So the golden hour, and that hour is important because we have no insulin response. So because we have no insulin response, the carbohydrates or glucose or sugar, whatever you want to call it, is in the muscles, in the blood, and will stay in the blood until it gets to the point where it's needed. Okay, the muscles. So that happens during exercise and for between 30 to 60 minutes after exercise. And the reason I say 30 to 60 is because for the first 30 minutes, it's almost the same as being in exercise, but then it really, the insulin response starts to come back. And once that kicks in, all the sugar that we take in goes straight into wherever it is, because the body doesn't want the sugar in the blood. It's quite corrosive and it can do damage to the vessel walls if it's in there too long. So we lose that ability to really show muscle glycogen, to turn that sugar into glycogen and boom, in the muscles and store it there for when we train next time. So if we do that and we get that right, we take in 500 to 750 mils of a high sugar solution, then we have a much better recovery straight after exercise, and that energy is available for our next workout, which is even better. Often when we start exercising and we haven't utilized that window, when you start exercising, you can feel quite like flat and miserable. And it takes 15 to 20 minutes before the body will then start bringing the glucose and whatever else it needs from other parts of the body to then be used to fuel exercise. And then at 15, 20 minutes, that's why we then start to feel better, because now we've suddenly got energy again to do what we want to do. So that first 30 minutes is fairly important. And then I also like to just put a little bit of protein in there. It's not necessary to have loads of protein, but what is important is that through the rest of the day that we're taking in enough protein. And recently I've been using a pretty cool analogy, and that's that if you start renovating your house, if you've got the bricks and the cement and the water and everything in the back garden ready, so that when the builders arrive and need to go, you can go straight away. Now, if we are eating enough protein through the day, then that's like having the bricks in your back garden and they're there and they're ready to go. Okay. And if you don't eat enough protein and eating well enough during the day, it's like the builders around going, hang on, there's only 10 bricks. I need 300 bricks. Please, can you go to Builders Warehouse? I've got to go to Builders Warehouse, got to order the bricks. Then you got to organize the truck to come and fetch the bricks. And then, so there's this huge delay. So we just like to make sure there are enough bricks all the time by eating protein throughout the day. And then I like to have a small bit of protein with that um, glucose or sugar carbohydrate feed, let's call it that, in the first 30 minutes after exercise, because that primes the muscles to actually start doing their work. And then if there's protein available, it can go for it.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's super interesting. I mean, this is obviously the real basic stuff. Often I see people spending thousands and thousands on massage guns and compression boots and all that, but they're neglecting this bit of it. I mean, that stuff works, but this stuff is what the foundation of recovery, post-run recovery, that you have to get right first before you start worrying about the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, we like to talk about it being a triangle, Brad, and we want to get the base of the triangle sorted out because the better the base is, the higher the point of the triangle is, and then all these extra modalities of let's call them complementary recovery modalities all come in near the top of the triangle. They really help to sharpen that point. But we've got to get the base of that triangle right. Otherwise, there's just nothing to build a triangle on and it'll just fall over.
Yeah, absolutely. So the nutrition is important. We've spoken at length about sleep as well, and not necessarily a magic number that you need to get so many hours a week, but just adding a little bit, particularly in a high sort of training window that we're in now, is if you can get an extra half an hour or potentially an hour's worth of sleep every night, you are well on your way to making sure you recover a lot faster. Lindsay, I wanted to touch on some of those other modalities if we can. I know you're a fan of some of them. I've tried one or two, and ones that I thought, oh, what a load of rubbish, actually worked. What are your thoughts on things like massage guns, recovery, those compression boots, all of the ice bars, all of those sorts of things? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so I'm quite complimentary on most of them. Again, it's the most important part is getting the basics right. And then I found for me personally that the boots have made the biggest individual difference. I really just always feel both amazing when I come out of them, but also like on a use on use on use. So, I'll often in the past have done an ice bath, which I can't stand. I do feel like it has a little bit of short term, but then that stiffness and soreness kind of returns quite quickly for me. And I'm not sure if, for me personally, that ice bathing reduces that inflammatory cycle, but I have found with a couple of other people that it does. So I think there's enough literature to say that it probably works. So that's likely good enough. Not so great for me. Compression boots for me, unbelievable. And those like myofascial release and massage guns also for me really good. Um, and very good activation. So I find that those are great for a flush and have my legs feeling quite nice and have me feeling a lot more supple and mobile, particularly in the hips when I'm using those guns. Um, but also just from a pure activation point of view, like a quick little zzz all over, like in my little trigger areas, and then I just feel so nice and activated. In the past, I've used compression socks quite a lot, and I found those also to definitely give me um, a benefit. So maybe it's psychosomatic, but I found it works really well. And then of course, like an actual sports massage. Like if I have to say the two things that work the absolute best for me, it's a sports massage and compression boots. Those are the two things that, for me as an individual, and I'm kind of stressing that as me as an individual because I think all of these modalities have their place and work, but it's what do you as an individual have access to and what makes you feel the best as an individual. And that's what I would like double down on and use those things.
Yeah, I was never convinced about the boots because I'd never tried them. I'd just seen, like, you go to expos and you see these dudes sitting at the stands in these boots, and you think, gee, you look a bit weird in public like that, but that's fine. And then when I was up, it was last July, I'd run a half marathon quite hard here in Cape Town, and we were up in Joburg, and I was staying at your place. We were doing some YouTube video shoots, and I used those boots, and I tell you what, I am sold. They are absolutely amazing. And then after Peninsula as well, I was back up in Joburg and used them again. Tell you what, they are. I think they are the bomb. So yeah, I absolutely love them. And then Lindsay, let's talk a little bit about sort of recovery weeks. We've obviously spoken about post-run recovery and making sure what you can do from a day-to-day basis to make sure you're ready for your next one. But in this sort of building block, March, April, as we head towards Comrades, you don't want to just keep loading and loading and loading and loading. You do need to take a step back at times. And as you said, the folks that are on the Coach Parry training plans will have a recovery week coming up in the next little while. Why do we need recovery weeks in our training? What do they do? And how do we sort of structure things within our training if folks aren't on our training plans?
So, Brad, you always sum this up the absolute best, and that is that you can only benefit from the training that you recover from. Okay. Now, we try and recover in our micro cycles. We try and recover by having some rest days, by spacing our workouts apart from each other. But there's still a lot that's going into our weeks. We've got strength training, we've got interval training, we're working on hills, we're doing our long runs. So there's a lot that's going into these weeks, and we're balancing them around so that we get just enough recovery. But as we go week on week on week, we start to get tired. And your highest risk for injury is when fatigue is high, but also that fatigue is coming because we're just not quite recovering enough from um, those sessions in those microcycles. Now, what is important is that to drive fitness, we have to generate fatigue. So we are expecting to be a little bit tired, and that's okay. But then we've got to give the body these little watershed moments, these breaks, where it can then really overcompensate and fix up everything, and we get a nice little surge of fitness. And that typically what works in a great routine is either 2 weeks of loading, 1 week of recovery, or much more commonly used is 3 weeks with 1 week. And I've seen a couple of suggestions now where people will work on a 10-day cycle instead of working on a 7-day cycle, because that way they can fit more recovery into each of those weeks. So there's a couple of ways to do it. But at Coach Parry, we like the 2-1 and the 3-1 because it does keep things a little bit simpler, particularly if you are a working individual and you've got to try and figure all of these things out around work. And so typically what we'll do is every third week, we'll have a week that's maximum of 75% of the total volume from the biggest week from the previous 3-week cycle. And so we'll lock off 75% of all the runs for a start, and then have a look and see where we are. And then very important, because this is what so many people forget, is that the strength training also needs to have a little bit of a step back. So either remove a session or drop down to 2 sets of everything, take half a step back in terms of all the weights. So just make it a much easier strength session, keep the movements, keep doing the stuff, keep the routine, keep the habit, but everything is just that much less. And that'll help you to mentally freshen up and physically freshen up so that you can then tackle the next period, which will be in April, where we want to ramp up even more. You can take advantage of all this new fitness strength, and you pile more work on top of that because it's a progressive overload. So we drive the fitness by allowing us to recover so that we can handle more, and then we give it more so that we can just keep repeating that cycle.
Yeah, you definitely, and this I see this quite often, Lindsay, with mates of mine. They say to me, "Gee, I'm so tired, can't deal anymore." But then I look at their Strava, and you've obviously got their 12-week block where you can see what they're doing week on week, and it's literally a straight line up. And they wonder why they're tired all the time. It's because they're not putting recovery weeks in. You mentioned the 2 to 3 weeks. I also think it's important to mention this, Lindsay, is that obviously the older we get, the more recovery we need. So the Comrades field is a lot older than sort of the fields who are running Two Oceans Half Marathon, as an example. So Shona, who's on our team, has done a lot of work around peri and postmenopausal females, and that sort of cohort of people obviously do need slightly more recovery than their male counterparts, and that's, I think, where the 2 week build, 1 week recovery comes in. And if you're sort of over 50 as a male runner, you obviously do need slightly more recovery as well. I don't know if you want to touch on the recovery side of things for slightly older athletes, particularly around Comrades.
Or if you work a particularly physically demanding job, like if you're on your feet for long periods of time. I had a question a few weeks ago at a club talk. Someone's pushing 15 plus hours on a gym floor, personal training, doing classes, both like grid style classes and spinning classes, that kind of thing. So someone who's doing that, I mean, that's already an enormous load. So someone in that boat, 2 weeks of loading and then a much easier week, is a great idea because they are doing so much more work than you and I, and then they need to. Um, so that's one thing. And then, yeah, you're right. As we get older, particularly, so I mean, it starts in our 30s, but we only really start to feel it in our later 40s. But certainly in our 50s, that's where most people really generally have to go, okay, now I really have to take cognizance of it. And then that accelerates up into our 60s and beyond. So, yes, more recovery time would be very beneficial in that scenario. There's some evidence to suggest that it starts a bit earlier in females. So it can be as early as 45 in some females, can be as late as 60 in some females. So there isn't really a set formula here. But yes, when you get to the point where you can feel those diminishing returns, you can feel like you're just not recovering fast enough, you're plateauing too early, then it's a really good idea to flip from a 3-1 to a 2-1.
Excellent stuff, Lindsay. I love chatting about recovery. I don't know if it's just that I prefer resting than running, but recovery is one of my favorite things on the planet, and I love talking about it too. So, yeah, just once again, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you are getting any value out of it, we really do appreciate you listening to it, but we do want to reach as many Comrades runners as we can. So we know that everyone is in WhatsApp groups. I got added to my running club's Comrades WhatsApp group a week and a half or so ago, so I'm going to make sure that I share this link into that group. And if you're in a WhatsApp group for your running club, please do share this podcast too. We do want to help as many runners as we can in the build up to Comrades 2025. As always, Coach, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we'll catch up again soon.
Cheers, Brad.